Hi, hello. Another rant while I wash the dishes. This time it's particularly petty and stupid rant, but it's also, I think, an interesting line of thought. And anyone out there who's planning a novel that is of the fantasy genre, listen up. I'm currently reading some novels which were written well before Minecraft came along. And there's this it's a series of war novels. You basically have people at war constantly, and one hero throughout the thread steadily gaining power and bringing the world to peace and dominion by the end of the series. You know, and all of the trials and tribulations and people interactions that happen on the way make up the novels. And we see things from different people's point of view. That's what keeps you reading the novel. And I am enjoying these novels. I'm quite enjoying them. Don't get me wrong, they're a good read. Well written. They leave me shaking my head a lot. There's a lot of ways in which they are ridiculously stupid, like the barbaric treatment of women, and the assumption that the women would recover from that indefinitely and continuously, and that it was not harmful to them to be shared around among the men, and that they were quite promiscuous and they liked that sort of thing. You know, it's a male writer. Doesn't understand that women actually aren't all just happy to spread their legs if given social permission, and that they don't like to have sex as often or as much as men, and that they are hard used when they're treated that way, and that if they have a lot of babies, they die young. Anyways, that's one rant that bothers me is you know, the barbarian male fantasy about women as pretty much just whatever it is you want from her, and when she interjects anything of her own desires or characters, then she's a nuisance woman. You know, I have to go check what the parrot's up to. Will you excuse me, please? Lovely, so now I get to put this thing through the video editor before I can upload it. And we're going to continue to have parrot shrieks. There was absolutely nothing wrong with him. He's just trying to get my attention, because I'm talking to somebody, the camera. Yeah, so we're moving on from the rank patriarchal bull crap in the average barbarian fantasy novel written by men for men, but offered to all of us as often the only opportunity. Oh, some of the female fantasy writers do delicious things. And I love the equality in their societies. You know, when you read novels, even going back, you know, to the 1930s, you're still getting female science fiction writers writing in equality, writing in women with equal roles. It's pretty neat. Rather wish Hollywood would pick up some of those novels and write them into movies. But it doesn't suit the agenda. So then we get to this part about what Minecraft and these fantasy novels. Now, you've got an army, you've got a series of armies making war on each other across the landscape. They're killing each other in tens of thousands, and always finding more recruits, in spite of the scarcity of said recruits, in spite of the fact that they have utterly destroyed the landscape under their feet. They come through, they loot what they will use in the next few days, and they will put the torch to every other resource in the environment. There would be no food left for anyone or any animal to eat, and everything flees the region, and it's a barren wasteland. And he describes it often. And so they've got wagon supply trains for the really big armies, you know, the ones that are behind the scavengers. The guys that come in and rape the women and loot the stores and set fire to everything. They come in as roving bands of men, and then behind them come the large army, to which all of the captives and supplies are sent. So we seem to have endless countryside, in spite of the fact that all of these kingdoms have been at war for generations. That's curious. Even though they're frequently riding across blasted landscapes, somehow there's still a place from whence supplies are coming. So they have wagon supply trains coming in from the capital, because the army's so large you can't live on what it scavenges alone. And the wagon supply trains get attacked by the enemy's roving barbarian minions, and they loot them, take the horses, and set fire to the rest. More supplies being wasted. And how do they take out large encampments, these barbarians? Well, the tents were bristling with arrows, and even before they stopped wriggling, they were set on fire. So, that was the one that cued me on. Like, thousands and thousands and thousands of arrows. Do you know how long it takes to make one arrow? How many feathers you need? Knapping the flint heads, or what are you using for arrowheads? You know, shell, bone, that has to be carved. So you've got how many craftsmen back at camp steadily turning out thousands and thousands of arrows? And yet we're in a starvation famine situation where we're having to steal from each other to survive. The whole thing just starts to collapse. And that's the thing, in Minecraft, you run out of stuff. You shoot the last of your arrows and have to come up with an alternate strategy. You know, you're fighting something at a distance and you run out of arrows. You have no choice but to close with your enemy. When you run out of food, you literally die in Minecraft. You die, and when you die, you lose all your stuff. And because it's a game, you come back and play again. And you're yourself. You know, you've got endless reincarnation as yourself. But you lose all your stuff. It will either be gathered up by your enemy if they are human, or it will wait for you until you get back. Unless it's a creeper that blew you up, or you fell in lava. Yeah, you lose your stuff, and you don't get stuff. You don't just walk over to a wall full of chests and get stuff. You fill those chests. You had to fill those chests the hard way. Now, it's not hard in Minecraft. Heck no. It's quite fun. You go down into the caves and you mine it. And, you know, I play with the mobs turned off, so that really helps. Because I'm a peaceful kind of person. So I don't need to eat, and I don't need to fight. That's, you know, I still need to kill, which is kind of stupid. But there are ways to, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. You can do a lot without killing even the animal mobs. But sooner or later, you got to take out a cow. You need leather. That's the one thing you definitely have to do, is you need to kill cows for leather. So anyway, in Minecraft, you definitely run out of resources. You run out of them frequently and have to garner more. And as a fantasy author, you need to remember that when you're writing in your battle scenes, that you're using limited resources. There's only so many swords in a kingdom. There's only so many arrows being made at a time. There's only so many straight sticks for arrows. You can't set fire to them. You don't set fire to your arrows. You don't fire the camp. Not right away. Not while the forms are still wriggling under their tents. You don't use fire to kill them. You go through stabbing each and every wriggling form. Now what you have is a space full of resources and dead people. Dead people maybe you're feeding to your dogs. It's a terrible thought, but you'd be stupid not to. And you'd be, you know, this particular novel doesn't have a single dog in it, so we can tell that the author was not a dog lover. But trust me, dogs have always been there. Dogs will be there. And there will be some really nasty ones in the mix. And feeding them human flesh just goes along with a good war dog, I'm sure. Depends on the dog's role. Is he running out to the enemy to savage whomever he can at whomever's ankles, or is he carrying stuff, or is he taking messages back and forth, you know? A lot of things dogs can do. So, you've got a camp now full of tents of corpses with all of the stuff in their pockets. their knives, their pocket knives, their swords, their weapons, their tools, their herbs, their stashes, their supplies, everything that they needed, your army needs. And so your army now goes through picking. They pick up the arrows, they pick up the weapons, they pick up the food, they pick up the coins, they pick up the tools. They pick up the clothes. Yes, even the clothing that isn't too damaged by the slaughter will be collected. And all of it will be distributed among the camp and its followers. How do I know these things? I used to read up to, how many books a week? I think I read 2 to 3 books a week for a long time. I read so voraciously, I ran out of things that were in my areas of interest and had to start reading technical things and learning stuff from my reading. Then there followed a period of mostly reading things that taught me how to do stuff and that taught me history and taught me crafts and taught me human nature and psychology. You can get a lot of novels, but I also branched out into other things. I also have a university degree, which in the main taught me to read. There's one thing to be literate, it's another thing to be literate enough to know what you're, to read things you don't want to read, to glean information where it's being hidden, or ignored, to see around and between the lines because of the other things you've read. There comes to be a certain point of knowledge in the mind that's a tipping point where you start to get a fairly basic gauge of humanity, human nature, and practicalities and what is and isn't possible. I mean, it's in recognition of this that the GED program exists, where without studying, you can walk into a GED office, take an exam, and get your high school diploma. Now, people these days are studying for their GED, and that's because they're taking it quite young, and there ought to be a young adult version of high school for folks like that, so they can get a proper education, because they're still young enough and their brains are still plastic enough. The GED is more for people over their 30s and 40s that aren't, they don't have time to go to school, they don't have time to study up, and if they're studying up, it's probably just to feel less nervous, and or the GED is not testing correctly, because the intention of the GED is to register that a certain amount of history, social studies, mathematics, reading, and so forth will have been acquired through simply living as an adult in our society, and that was a general equivalency of a high school diploma. It wasn't that long ago, my grandfather's generation still saw high rates of illiteracy, and it was not considered an issue. It was far less normal to be literate. Literate people stood out. They were strange. They got teased. They got called names. They got turned to in times of need. People would be like, I heard you can read. I've got a letter here. I don't know what it says. Who's it from? And the literate person for that would then read them the letter. And that's another thing we're lacking, sadly, in these fantasy novels, is the understanding of how profoundly that illiteracy affects the population. I really would like to write a fantasy novel. I think I might. I've got portions of one in my brain. I always had my character on a world devoid of Homo sapiens, but what if she is a fortress of solitude in a world of barbarians? Interesting. All right. That's my rant. Think about resource. Oh, and why, in a fantasy novel, would we want to think about limited resources? Good question. The reason is because it helps bring people's minds. Because when we read, we learn. An author isn't just providing amusement. The author is also shaping a mind. No matter how old you are, it's affecting the shape of your mind when you read, especially when you're so deeply absorbed, as you are in a fantasy series like Game of Thrones, for instance, which is not the one I'm talking about. Although Game of Thrones could certainly be brought up against this standard and say, hey, you know, why aren't you paying a little more attention to resource scarcity? But they are paying more attention than the one I'm reading. They do discuss resource scarcity, especially if you do read the books. George Martin does keep in mind that resources are limited, especially with winter coming. Resources have to be hoarded. He keeps that in mind, and this is something that I think that our world needs to remember, because we're so many of us now, and we're so heavy on this earth. We really need to remember that it's a limited envelope, and no matter how much we research Mars, it's not gonna, space isn't gonna save us. Lack of space is gonna kill us before space can save us. We need to sort it out. I do lots of things. Maybe I'll have a rant about that sometime.